Welcome to Arcade Attack. A retro gaming podcast for up to 4 players.
Hi guys, it's Adrian here from Arcade Attack, and on today's show I interview Bruce Shelley. Now he is Sid Meier's right-hand man who's worked on such classics as Railroad Tycoon, Civilization, and then moved on to Ensemble Studios to work on the excellent Age of Empires series. Now this guy knows his stuff, and basically every game he's been involved in has turned to gold. So sit back, learn more about the legend, and enjoy the interview. So thank you so much, Bruce, for being on the Arcade Attack podcast. It really is an honour to have you here. Some of your games, well, pretty much all the games you've made have been had a big impact at me growing up. So thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. It's nice to hear from people who enjoy the games. So it's been a pleasure and fun to work on them, sure.
Excellent. Before you worked in the video game industry, you helped design a number of board games. I know you're quite passionate about your board games. Before you got into the video game industry, can you briefly go through how this this career started for you?
Sure. I played games as a kid, and even as a young adult, I played complicated games, war games especially, games with history, and then I got into more complicated family games. Like there was an English game designer named Francis Tresham who built a Civilization game and a railroad game called 1830 1829, I think, that I really liked. And I was a graduate student at the University of Virginia, and we had a game club there, and a bunch of us got together and we started a role-playing game. We built Dungeons and Dragons, which was getting started in the 70s. Yeah. And we played a version of Dungeons and Dragons based on Middle-earth, and then we got the idea to contact the Tolkien estate and get permission to build role-playing games based in Middle-earth. And we started a game company called Iron Crown Enterprises, but it wasn't really my kind of game. I liked the complicated history games. So I got a chance shortly to work in New York City for a company called SPI that published a magazine called Strategy and Tactics Magazine, with a game in each issue, usually a game about some kind of history or military situation. That didn't last very long. I was just an intern and they were running out of money. But that gave me more introductions, and I ended up getting a job with a company in Maryland called the Avalon Hill Game Company, which we did mostly war games, but also some family type games. And then I realized after 5 years or so there that this wasn't the future for me. It just wasn't. I didn't think it was going to be anything to do for the rest of my life. So, yes. But before I found a real job, I found out that there was a company called MicroProse in the same city on the north side, and I started lobbying them about hiring me. I played a game called Pirates, which became Sid Meier's Pirates, and really thought that was pretty cool, and I could see that might be the future of gaming. And they finally had me in for an interview and offered me a job the next day, and that's how I got into computer games. And I started working for computer games a little bit for Avalon Hill, but that was the real breakthrough, working with MicroProse.
What a huge company! I mean, you sound very, taking the bull by its horns, really. So fair play to you, Bruce. Good on you. Do you still play a lot of board games today, out of interest? Are you still a fan of that particular hobby?
I do when I get the chance. And it's usually the company I work for today is called Bonus XP, and they're based in Texas. And there's I don't live there. I live in the Chicago area. But there's 4 or 5 of us who don't live in Texas but work for the company. And when I get down there, I used to try to get down there once a month for a week, and we'd also usually schedule a board game afternoon, board game night when I'm there. And I did some work for a while as a contractor with a company in Germany, Blue Byte. And when I was there, we usually had a board game night there. So I kept my hand in a little bit. But where I live now, nobody really is playing games that I know. So I don't play many board games anymore, other than work-related stuff.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. You briefly spoke about how you got into MicroProse. I mean, huge company. I assume when you got there, they weren't quite as big as they are over the next few years. What was the first game do you remember the first ever video game you worked on? Maybe in MicroProse, or even you mentioned Avalon Hill before, actually.
Yeah, before that I worked, I was asked to move from board games over to their computer game division. And I took the chance because I said, well, this looks like the future, and maybe it was an opportunity. And I remember the first game I worked on was a translation of a board game called Wooden Ships and Iron Man to the computer. And I can't remember what system it was going to run on. I guess it was going to run on a TRS-80 or an IBM PC. I'm not sure. Yeah. But what I remember most about it was a literal translation of the board game. It was just transmitting it over to a computer screen. And the fact that we only had four colors to work with. It was CGA graphics. So the first computer game I worked on had, black, white, cyan, and magenta colors. And, I had lived through a lot of technical change.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Do you remember
at MicroProse, the first game I worked on was called F-117A Stealth Fighter. I was just a 3D modeler. I was building maps and building planes out of 3D objects and stuff. That's what I did the first game I worked there.
Good stuff. So obviously you had and you still have now obviously programming skills. Was that developed at university or at college or?
I was not a programmer. I'm not a programmer today. I mean, there was always a place in the industry for somebody who can manage projects and for writing, communicating and I guess I look upon the designers often as the visionaries for the game. I tell people, actually a friend of mine named Greg Kostikian wrote this, I believe, and I borrowed it from him, was that the designer's job is to picture in his mind what's supposed to happen on screen, and what the player will be doing, and then translate that vision to the people who are actually responsible for making it so. Yep. So that's the way and there's always been room for that person in any game I've ever worked on. There's always been somebody whose job is the vision and translating the vision and communicating the vision.
Brilliant. I mean, that must be quite a fun job in a sense. I know there's a lot of responsibility, but it's your initial ideas that the game is going to play, so that must be quite a rewarding role. Would you agree?
Yes, it's definitely fun, but it's a challenge too because you're responsible for the vision, and that means that the game is going to hang on the design team, how well they can create something that's going to be not only engaging but also make business sense. I tell people we're in the commercial business, not in the business. We have to make money with what we make, or we're out of business.
Good stuff. I want to ask you now about Railroad Tycoon, a huge franchise, a huge game, a really great game. I'm a fan of it myself. You obviously worked. Before we go into it, actually, how did you first meet Sid Meier, a proper legend, one of the biggest names in the video game industry? Do you remember the first time you met him, or was this the first game you worked with Sid?
When I first went to work there, I was, like I said, I worked on F-117A. I think we called it F-19 Stealth Fighter originally. Then we changed the name when we found out what the actual designation of the plane was. And he was the lead designer and programming that game. So when I walked in the door and was assigned to that game, I immediately got to meet him. He was a little bit he's a quiet fellow, and he would not introduce himself to new employees right off the bat, but he had to meet me because he was telling me what to do. So we got to meet right away. And I think I didn't have to work intimately with him, but I had to work with him. And I think that over the next year and a half or so, we started playing board games. As a matter of fact, we played, I think I had worked on a railroad game at Avalon Hill called 1830, right, which was designed by Francis Tresham from there in North Hampshire. Sid liked it, and he was an enthusiast with model railroad trains. He had grown up in Switzerland, or been a child in Switzerland. He still had his train sets from Switzerland, I think. So he was noodling with the idea of a railroad game, and then it just appeared one day, and I got a chance to play it. It became the genesis for Railroad Tycoon. But he asked me if I would work with him intimately as his number two.
Nice.
He usually had somebody who was the person who did all the stuff he did not want to do, which was meet with generally meet with the sales team, work with the play testers, write the documentation, write the manuals, come up with more ideas, be a sounding board, be his main play tester. And he asked me if I would want to do that with him, and I absolutely jumped at that opportunity.
Bruce, good on you. I mean, it sounds funny. You just playing that board game, introducing the board game, could have really got the game off the ground in a sense. So it's amazing how these little things can spark huge games in the future, isn't it?
Yeah. I was really impressed because Sid was always, and still today I'm sure, is noodling all the time with ideas for games. His computer always had a half a dozen prototypes on it that he was playing around with. And he went off on a vacation. I remember that we were actually building a game called Covert Action. We had started working on a game called Covert Action about spies. And he went off on his 2-week vacation in August, and he came back with this little railroad thing. He said, try this. Tell me what you think of this. So I remember playing it and saying, well, this has got the genesis of a cool idea, I'd love to see this work. And we went off. I remember we remembered his lunch. We went to a restaurant in a nearby shopping mall and had lunch, and the decision was, do we stop working on this Covert Action spy game and do this railroad game, or do we complete the Covert Action game first? And I was very enthusiastic for the railroad game, and I think he was too, and he just wanted a little confirmation. And so he went back and told management of the company that we're going to stop working on the spy game and start building this railroad game.
Was the spy game ever completed? Do you know that or not?
It was, yeah. It was completed next because we finished. They let us do the railroad game, and it won a lot of critical appeal. And it only took us I think it took, I can't remember now. I think it was like 6 months or 9 months to finish it. And then we started redoing finishing the spy game. But then by then he came up with another idea, which was Civilization. He started screwing around with what was going to be the prototype for Civilization. And the management team came in and put their foot down and said, look, we really want this spy game. We put a lot of money in it. Please don't do anything else until you finish it. Yeah. And I said, man, I'm telling you, Sid, this Civilization thing you're doing is really cool. And he says, I know, but we got to finish this spy game. So we put Civilization on the back burner for a while and finished the spy game, which was published. And then we got to go ahead and do work on Civilization.
I mean, Civilization, it's won so many awards. It's one of the most important PC games of all time, if not one of the most important video games of all time. I mean, what was the initial thoughts when you obviously thought it's a special title, but do you ever dream it'd be such a big title?
I think I knew, and I don't know if Sid's ever admitted this, but I knew pretty early on that we were making a really remarkable game that was gonna blow the world away. And that was my feeling. It was so cool and so much fun to work on, and I thought it was such a rich experience and did so many good things as that game can do. He had spoken about the imperative of games as an opportunity to teach as well as entertain, and I thought Civilization was doing all that. It was entertaining, and it was also going to expose people to a lot of ideas maybe that they hadn't considered, and the whole breadth of this. Civilization, the unfolding of Civilization. I thought it was really, really great. I made a point of when he gave me the first time we talked about it. It was on his computer. He would play it in front of me. We talk, and then he finally gave me a disc. He burned a disc, a 5.25 floppy disc, and says, "Okay, here's a version. Play it." For a couple hours and let me know what you think. And I made a point of saving that floppy disk. I had not saved the first version he gave me of Railroad Tycoon. I was sorry I had not. This time I saved the Civilization disk. I dated it, put it aside, because I thought this could be historic, And it's now it's over 25 years later, and I mentioned this that I had it. Yeah. I mentioned to a museum in Rochester, New York, the Strong Museum of Play. They're trying to save the history of the video game industry. I told them I had this disc, so we want that. And then I said, well, before I give it to you, I got to ask Sid if he wants it. He said, no, I want that disc. And I had a box of versions of the games we worked on that I'd saved over the years when I was there. So I had versions of Civilization and Railroad Tycoon that had been burned to discs, and he said he wanted them all, and I just packaged them up and sent them to him. And a week later, he called me and he said, "Hey, our IT guys got that 5.25 floppy disk working. The original first playable version of Civilization that ever existed off his computer, and then it had been preserved and they could actually run it. It was a real-time game. It was really a little different than the final Civilization, but it's an historic artifact.
Wow. I mean, that's absolutely incredible. Oh man, Civilization, I mean, absolutely incredible game. Do you still, have you played the recent ones since? Are you still a fan of the series?
I haven't played one for a while. I'm sure I didn't play the last one. I played that game to death, the first version, and I played a lot of the second one as well. And I think I've exhausted the what I'm going to get out of it in a sense. I don't know. It's just I'm older now. I just don't play as many games as I used to. It seems like as I get older, I think, well, there's other things I want to do with my time than spend hours in front of a computer playing a game. I think I log my time, and unless it's work related, I don't play much anymore.
That's fair enough. I mean, you obviously work in the industry still today, so you're. I completely understand your answer. When I was playing Civilization, I was quite young at the time. It made me feel smarter. It made one of the sort of games where I did actually feel like I was learning when I was playing it. So I want to say thank you to you and obviously Sid. It was such a groundbreaking game. It's still spoken about to this day as one of the most important games ever. I mean, how does that feel for you personally? Just having your name attached to such a huge title.
Well, it's a great honor for me to think back about that opportunity, and it was not only just it was great fun to work on. It was it was a great opportunity for me personally. It helped my career dramatically, and it's something now. It's like we have in American baseball we have the World Series, and it's like I got to play for the 1927 Yankees, and we won a World Series. That's like I felt. We won a championship with the game, and no matter whatever help I did in my career, I've got that. I've got the Stanley. My name is on the Stanley Cup, for example, as far as video games, something comparable. I worked on a wonderful, wonderful game that will live for a long time to come, and that can't be taken away. You can't take it away. You can't take it away from me. I was on that team.
Yeah,
I feel very proud about that.
I remember talking to Todd Fry a few months ago, and he mentioned that he was working on Pac-Man. He said no one could ever take that away from me, and I kind of get the same feeling from you, Bruce, that it was, it's such a legendary title, absolutely incredible times. Good on you.
That'll be. I've had some other opportunities, but that was the one. It was a big one.
I mean, would you again? We'll talk about your future titles and. Do you think Civilization was your peak, the highest point of your career? I know you had some huge games afterwards, but did anything top that for you personally?
You have to remember that I was the number 2 guy on that project. I mean, Sid did 95% of the design. I think sometimes he'd have a stumbling block and he'd say, I got a problem with this game. I need an answer, and we'd sit there and talk for hours. And I think sometimes I had a solution or offered something. Like I think in Civilization 1, you built this palace. He was thinking of some way to reward the player when he did something well, and the palace might have been my idea. I'm not certain about that. And then he was struggling with how to end the game. And I said, well, what about we build a spaceship and sail to Alpha Centauri? And then that would be the culmination of American, human civilization on Earth. We colonized the universe. And he says that worked for him, and I think that was my idea, but I'm not certain. So I mean, but 99% of the work was his. And I tell people he could have done that game with 3 or 4 other people in our office, but I could not have done that with anybody else. He was the man. And so I mean, I'm proud that I worked on it. My name is on it. I played third base, for the team or something like that. But he was the guy, and
Well,
so it's a milestone in my career for sure, important point. But I mean, I had several others, and I'm happy with all the good things that have happened to me in this career. I'm happy with all of them.
It's very humble of you, Bruce. I mean, obviously Sid Meier, what a legend. Okay, one of the most important names in video game history. I know you spoke briefly about it, but could you maybe describe a typical day when you used to work with him, and how do you reflect back on your really successful partnership?
Sure. I mean, I usually got to work earlier than he did. He was a little late riser, and so what normally would happen was he would give me a disc, a new version of the game, before he left for the day, or maybe I would leave earlier, and he would be a little later. And when I came in the morning, there'd be a floppy disk on my chair, and it would be the new version. So I would play it for an hour or two in the morning, and then he would contact me, call me or something like that, and I'd go down the hall and visit with him. We sit down and we talk. We might talk till lunch about what we liked about that version he made yesterday. And we would sit there and talk about what we liked, didn't like, what would we change, it was the design process. We call it design by playing, is what I've come to call it over the years.
Yeah.
And then I usually had other responsibilities. I might have other jobs within the company. I was managing a project, another game, or something like that. And I might have to do something else. And then he would work on the afternoon on redoing, maybe making new art pieces. He did a lot of the original art. He would program, he would think about the design. And then maybe there'd be a new design, maybe there'd be a new version that afternoon, or maybe there wouldn't be until the next day. So there'd be this give and take all afternoon, or about how the game was working. And we just did that for months, and he wouldn't let anybody else play it, which I thought was unusual. But so I would have to explain the game to other people. They come into my office and say, "Oh, come on, tell me about this." And especially our sales guys. It was one of our salesmen, was Glenn Drover, who's a designer now in his own right, and he was in my office all the time. How does this work? Show me what this is doing. He says, "Oh, this is great. I can't wait to play this." And so I was the ambassador for the game within the company, because Sid was kind of private. And finally, at some point, we opened it up to more players and got more input than just mine. And that was a typical day, a play test and discussions, and more play tests, more discussions.
Good on you. Obviously, you mentioned that Sid's quite a private man, but pretty much all of his games has got his name plastered all over it, which is, I can completely see why. He's a complete legend. But how was it agreed that Sid would game? I understand you saying earlier he was the main man, but was it an early decision that he would be in the main spotlight, at least for the name, or how was that? Was he happy about having his name on the games? What was your view and his views on that?
You'd have to ask him, really. I mean, my guess is that the company decided he had become well known in the industry, and I think the corporation decided it would be great to put his name on the cover. It would help sell. My guess is he was fine with that. He wasn't a shrinking violet. He appreciated, that he was doing something really great. I think he personally invented 4 or 5 genres of computer games. Yeah. And so I think he was fine with it. And if it helped the company sell the games, everybody was happy with that. I think there was no feeling that this was not fair. I mean, we all recognize that he was the brilliant man in the room. And he had also been a partner in the company. He had co-founded MicroProse. We didn't realize at the time that he had sold his half of the company to the other guy, Bill Staley, the president. We didn't know that at the time, but when the company went public, that was all revealed in the documentation. So that was the first we knew that Sid wasn't even a partner. He was just a contractor by the time I was working with him.
Well, fair enough. Are you still in contact with Sid? And would you ever be tempted to work with him in the future?
Yes, we are in contact. He doesn't reach out a lot. He and our wives, we went on a cruise together after I was gone, and the last couple of years we've teamed up a couple of times for conferences because people were invited. We were invited. He was invited. Let's put it this way. He was invited to speak about the 25th anniversary of Civilization. And he called me up and says, "Look, I'm not doing that without you. I'm not going to go out there alone." So we spoke at a Game Developers Conference 2 years ago, I think, and then we did another retrospective at a DICE conference in Las Vegas together, and that's been fun. I looking back on it, and all the things all the water has gone over the dam since then. It's been fun to reflect, and also for me just to remember what I learned and how I tried to take what I learned working from him with me. I mean, I tell people that working with him was like going to game design university. I mean, he was the first person I ever worked with who actually considered, a lot of the background. What is happening when people are having fun with a game, and how can we capture that and make sure it happens again and again? What is exactly going on here? The word fun is thrown around, but let's take fun apart. What is actually happening when someone is having fun? And so with the idea was like he helped me climb the ladder. You climb the ladder as a designer, learning stuff, and I got a couple legs up the ladder very quickly. Not like working in board games, but also working with him.
Good stuff. Do you think there'll be any opportunities in the future for a future video game with Sid, or is that unlikely in your view, Bruce?
I think it's unlikely. I mean, we don't, we live 800 miles apart. I mean, he's working with his son now. His son is working with him. And he was talking about retirement a few years ago. I'm not sure. I think when his son came to work there, I think he gave up on retirement, but I'm not really sure. And
fair enough.
I just don't think it's a possibility,
Okay, no, fair enough. Why did you choose to leave MicroProse for Ensemble Studios? Was that an easy decision? Because obviously MicroProse, huge company at the time. What happened there then, if you don't mind me asking?
No, I don't mind asking that. What happened actually was I got married, and my wife was making a whole lot more money than I was, and she gave up a really good paying job so I could stay at MicroProse for a year, and then she couldn't find a comparable job to what she'd been doing in the area, in the Maryland, Washington area, Washington D.C., Baltimore area, and then she was recruited for a really good job in Chicago. So we decided that I was the lowest paid designer at MicroProse. I'd come to work for very little because I came from nowhere. And the people in charge weren't going to do anything about that. I mean, Sid was a contractor, and I was working for him. So the vice president his salary didn't depend on what Sid was doing. It was dependent on what everybody else in the company was doing. So I was like an extra piece that he didn't really care about. And that's the way I look at it anyway. So I said, well, it's time for me to move on, And I actually didn't work for Ensemble right away. That came a few years later. I was writing books. I was hired by a company called Prima Publishing to write strategy guides for games because they had written about games I've worked on.
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, you could do that for us. So I did that for about almost 2 years. And then a fellow that I knew back at that University of Virginia Game Club 15 years earlier called me up and started asking me about how to make computer games. He was running a business software company in Dallas, but people that worked with him wanted to make games, and he started asking me about it. And finally, I told my wife, I think he's going to start a game company, and he did. That became Ensemble Studios, and he asked me to get involved, and I said I can't move there, and he said you don't have to. And so for the next 20 years, I worked for 3 different companies along 20 miles of a highway in Texas, 3 different startups, and that's how Ensemble got started.
Good. I mean, you've seen these companies grow from not much into these huge organisations. It must have been pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, it's been fun. I mean, I work with really, really brilliant people. I've been lucky in that respect. Like Tony Goodman was the head of Ensemble, and he was a smart businessman. He had some partners that were smart, and they funded what became Ensemble Studios. And Tony did a great job of recruiting people and finding the right person for the right job. I mean, my job was to figure out how to make games as an overall process and be one of the early designers. And his brother Rick was a really detailed guy. He became the lead designer in Age of Empires, and he got some. Angelo Loudon was an ace programmer who still works with Tony in a company they run now. And Tony had a knack for finding the right person at the right time, and then he did a good job of getting in touch with Microsoft. I mean, one of the keys to Ensemble was the fact that Microsoft published our games, and it just turned out it was serendipitous that Microsoft was looking to get into the computer game industry when we were looking for a publisher. I remember we had several people interested in the game that was going to become Age of Empires. We traveled from Massachusetts to Seattle in one weekend to make demonstrations. And I think there's in the case where my relationship with Sid helped, because when we were talking to Microsoft, guys at Microsoft were gamers, and they played Civilization, and one of them I had spent a day with at a television studio in California. We were both there to promote a game we were working on. I was promoting Railroad Tycoon for the Macintosh, and he was promoting Sierra Online, I think. And now here he is several years later, and he's a senior man, one of the senior fellows at Microsoft's game studio. So we already had a relationship, and they knew that. They said, well, this guy worked on Civilization. We could maybe take a chance on these people. It all came together, and Microsoft became a publisher, and that was a huge, huge opportunity win for us.
You don't get much bigger than Microsoft, do you, to be fair? Wow. It just shows you that the video game industry is quite a small world, isn't it, Bruce, really? All these connections you build up come back to play.
Yes, and I think, absolutely true. I mean, I can't go to a game convention without seeing people I know. I mean, they've spread around. MicroProse eventually came apart, and then Ensemble was taken apart by Microsoft, and there was 100 people at both those companies that I work with. Yeah. And then there's other studios I work with, even in Europe, that I've worked with. So I keep running into these people. It is a relatively small community. it selects for people who have skill. It's not an easy industry, and if you don't have a certain amount of ability, you're gonna have to find something else to do. And so the people with ability, no matter how wacky the industry gets, getting laid off or things, your game doesn't sell, you're out of business, and you surface again and you have another chance.
Really appreciate that. No, that's very interesting to hear that, Dan. Excellent stuff. Bit like Civilization, Age of Empires was one of my favourite games as a young teenager. It's up there for me with, I used to love Command & Conquer and Dune 2. I love a great strategy game. Again, huge title. How did this opportunity first come about, and what was your exact role on Age of Empires?
Well, when we started Ensemble Studios, we were feeling around for a game to make, and the idea that I remember we first started thinking about was like a survival game. There's a shipwreck on an island. You got to gather the resources to get off the island, get the ship, and then you find out there's other people on the island. There's villains or whatever. And we thought, okay, this could be a rich world, like Lost in Space or something. And then one of the early programmers, Tim Dean, came in. He played tons of games. Came in and says, "You guys ought to look at this game." And he was showing it. He was playing Warcraft and then Command and Conquer. He says, "Look at these games." And he says, and so the idea, he said, the idea, I don't know if it was Tim, but he says, he got us to play those games. And he said, consider this, and then the idea came about, why don't we do one of these games, but do it in a historical framework? And then the idea says, why don't we merge like the history and the technology of and the economics of civilization with real-time strategy? And it just came to us as the vision. He said, well, that seems really great. So then the idea was, let's instead of doing all of civilization, let's start with ancient times. And then we have some runway ahead of us if it works. And that became the vision for Age of Empires. And it turned out, I remember within a year or two, a gaming magazine in America, it was called Computer Gaming World, had an article about real-time strategy. It was a big deal. And there was 50-some real-time strategy games in development around the world that they were aware of. And we were the only one that was based in history. Everybody else was doing science fiction or fantasy, following in the footsteps of those big early games. And it turned out that making a historical real-time strategy was a big win for us. It reached out to a lot of people.
Well, that's incredible. Just keeping it to history was your unique selling point, really. How incredible is that when you think about it? I loved it, and it did teach me a bit of history as well. And the look and feel of the game was brilliant. How do you reflect back on Age of Empires on a personal note?
Well, it was like the second big thing in my career after working with Sid was working with Ensemble and building Age of Empires. It was right up my alley. I liked historical games. I did a lot of the research. Picking the civilizations, picking the units, deciding on buildings, deciding on technology. I had done a lot of that already for Civilization. I was back doing it again, and I enjoyed that. I really liked reading it. We did historic notes or further reading, list of books to go around and read. It was like, I want to say it was in my wheelhouse, and everybody there at the designers on AH1, particularly Rick Goodman and Brian Sullivan, we'd all come up playing these historic board games and interested in history. So it just resonated really well with us all, and we had to drag in some cases the programmers and the artists along with our enthusiasm. But that was our job, was to create the vision and get everybody enthusiastic and move ahead with it. And it did so well that it just was great.
Good stuff. I wonder if Bill Gates was a fan. Obviously, Microsoft was your publisher. I wonder if he actually ever played the game. I don't suppose you know the answer, do you, by any chance?
I don't know if he ever played it. It wouldn't be unusual for me. I think he was a pretty hands-on guy. I did get to meet him once.
Oh, really?
Tony Goodman and I had to go to Seattle, and the company had arranged, the game group had arranged for all the games that were being developed at one time to be presented in a room and to Bill. And so we were briefed ahead of time. We had 10 minutes to make a demonstration of our game. And he would walk around with a couple of guys, and he would stop at station after station and look at each game and get a little talk. And he said, you only have 10 minutes, but if he asks questions, you keep talking until he stops asking questions. It could go on for half an hour if he wants it to. After 10 minutes, you're done unless he asks. And he kept asking us questions, which we thought was great. And he looked at the game. He says he loved the game. He talked about it. He was familiar enough with it, whether he played it or not. He knew a lot about it. And he wanted to know if we should be marketing it as an educational software rather than games. Remember, that was one of the questions that jumped out at me. And my answer was that we don't teach them anything. We don't entertain them first. So we're gonna focus on making it. It's all about entertaining people. And if they learn something, that's the second piece that happens. And I explained a little bit about how we borrowed from history to make a good game. We didn't try to remodel history. And we left out slavery and the Black Plague and religious wars and things like that. I mean, we captured a certain essence of it that made it entertaining.
Oh, that's really interesting. Bruce, I mean, I love hearing these stories. It's so incredible. Exactly, you know, do you actually design the games on paper first when you come up with these ideas, or you said earlier you don't do much programming yourself? I'd love to get sort of what's a typical day for you when you work in these sort of design elements.
Well, I'm not sure there is a typical day, but a typical day is we play the game, we discuss it, and then we work on maybe give people lists of stuff that's not in we should get in, or go find artwork for the art people or something like that. But here's not a typical day, but a day that I think was instrumental in the Age of Empires was we were talking about, we're going to compete with Warcraft, we're going to compete with this Command and Conquer. So we got a whiteboard out and we listed the things that Command and Conquer was doing really well, the key features, what they were doing great. We did the same thing for World of Warcraft. Then we did another list, was what are they not doing? What are those games, what would be great that they're not doing? And so what we did was the first two lists became like our minimum requirements. We have to be as good as they are at these things they do really well. And the third list, which was what they were not doing, that was the opportunities. That was how we're going to make Age of Empires different and give people a new experience. Now, a lot of this, we did this, I think this was my idea to make this chart, but we did this without thinking deeply about what it was. But now I look back on it, and I've since considered this. What we did at a very high level. We made our game different. When you looked at it, it was different. The title was different. The look of it was different. The time period was a different experience. And that made it stand out. It wasn't a Warcraft clone, or it wasn't a Command and Conquer clone like some of those other 50 games were. We were different. And then when you played the game, we had built enough new stuff into it, innovated enough at the gameplay level that it wasn't the same experience either. It was different to look at and understand, and it was different. It was innovative to play. And I later built a whole speech around this for conferences called "Differentiate and Innovate. Don't imitate." So a friend of mine who was a business development guy for a French company at the time. He told me he was in South Korea and he had seen 6 clones of Diablo. But he said, I can't buy any of them because it's just Diablo with some new paper, painted over. And that made me think about what we had done years earlier without realizing. We had not cloned Warcraft or Command and Conquer. We had made them a different game that had some new innovation at the gameplay level, and that was one of the keys to being successful.
Sounds really that worked really well. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Age of Empires. It is different from those games you mentioned. Are you a fan of the other 2 games? Do you like Warcraft, Command and Conquer? Did you play them a lot yourself? Or?
I did play them at the time, and I thought they were really cool. I mean, I think I liked Warcraft better. I think part of it for me was a personal connection. Like when everything was a robot, I don't feel any personal connection to it. It's just machines fighting, And Warcraft had more personality. And I always like I tell people that one of my sayings was the sun was always shining in Age of Empires. It was a bright, inviting world that you wanted to know more about. We had deer running around and birds flying, and it was believable. And then even like Age of Empires 3. I have ancestors who fought in the American Revolution, so that I had a personal connection to the period. So I felt more attuned to playing something like that when something was really abstract or dark or forbidding. I mean, it's a personal taste matter, but and it turns out I believe that an awful lot of people around the world did like the bright, inviting look of the Age series. They did feel comfortable there. I mean, I know it was popular with children, and I met a journalist who said when he talks to women about playing games, they always mentioned Age of Empires as one of the games that they played because they could do it their style, the way they liked it, and it wasn't intimidating.
Brilliant, good stuff. Obviously, you've worked on many Age of Empire games, not just the first one, and a number of expansion packs. Do you have a personal favourite game or expansion pack in the series as the one you thought that really stood out for you personally?
They all kind of blur together, to be honest. But I think everybody who worked on this series looks back on Age of Empires 2 as the perfect storm of a game. We learned so much making Age 1 that we couldn't put in Age 1. We just realized we could do it, but there's a better way to do some of these things. And then we had a much better. I think our artists had gotten so much better. We had the period was a little more attractive. Knights and castles was much more fun than Greeks and Romans or something to many people. It was much more. It seemed like it just seemed like a better period, a perfect period for this kind of game. So I think everybody thinks that Age 2 was the best game we did. But I personally really liked Age 3 because it's my favorite periods in history, like the Age of Discovery. And like I said, I had a personal connection to that time period. And I think we did the graphics were incredible, I think, and the 3D graphics were great. So I guess I have a place in my heart for Age 3. Age 2 is probably the best game we did. And on top of all that, Age of Mythology was a lot of fun to make because it was so different.
Yeah, I remember playing that. I thought it's just I agree. It sort of stood out a bit from the original games a bit more. Was there any random armies or expansion packs or even a sort of other games in the series that were mentioning quite interesting ideas but never actually made it into the final versions?
Nothing big. We struggled sometimes with stuff like the home city idea in Age of Empires 3. I think we went through 12 iterations of that, as I recall, before we found something we thought was acceptable. We also experimented quite a bit with formations, in Age 3, the Napoleonic era and, the column versus the line of the British army and the columns of the French armies, how they conflicted. And we thought, we tried to make something really interesting out of that whole idea of formations making a difference, but we never really got it to click. And I remember we had a big company meeting and we sit there, everybody, it was like 100 people in the room. We said, what do you think? We had a vote. Do you like the way formations are working? And it came to like about a 50-50 vote. 50% of the company really liked it. 50% said, I don't know. And we didn't think that was a good enough threshold. We needed much more buy-in to make it work. So we dropped it out of the project. So that's a big thing I remember.
Oh, interesting. I'd love now to talk a little bit more about another game you worked on, Halo Wars. Quite an interesting title. Obviously based around another huge franchise, Halo, but a very different sort of game. How did this opportunity come about? Do you remember?
Well, actually, I did not work on Halo Wars in any kind of official capacity except as a tester. The company was split up into different projects, and I was more doing PR by then instead of doing design. But the way I think we were trying to come up with some new ideas as we are now part of Microsoft, and there was concern about the real-time strategy going away as a PC, and the company was also focusing on the Xbox. So we thought we should try to make ourselves relevant to the company as the company was changing, and we came with the idea of. We thought of the idea of making real-time strategy to the Xbox would be a good experiment and hopefully a winner. And then we pitched that idea to them, and the manager we pitched to it originally was very enthusiastic, and we started the project. And then our managers at Microsoft changed, and that upset the whole apple cart. They canceled at least several of our games we were working on, and then they eventually decided to close us down entirely and because the jobs we had, 100 people in Texas, they wanted to move those into Xbox development in the Seattle area, but we were contracted to finish the Halo Wars game. They were willing to take a chance on that and see if we could deliver on a real-time strategy for the Xbox. And I think in large, we did make that a success.
Yeah, I haven't played it personally, but I've heard it's got good reviews. I think they might be working on a new game in the series, actually, if I'm correct. So, no, good on you. You've already spoke about, like a typical day or the kind of things you got up to back in the day, but was there anything that really inspired you when you started a project, or if you got stuck on a particular game? Was there anything you went back on that helped inspire and make these games so memorable?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think what I learned, and I think what makes the difference in the things that the guys I work with, people I work with, is that we embraced completely Sid's idea of prototyping early and playing as soon as you can, and then play it every day and work on it every day. Play it every day and change it. Mm. I worked in Germany for a while as a contractor after Microsoft let us go, and they seemed to have a different attitude. They had a plan. They had designed the game up front, and the whole project was just creating the project to that design document. And there wasn't a lot of free leeway. There was like the testing wasn't intended to find out whether it was working or not. It was testing whether the plan was coming together. And we had a completely different attitude that I worked with, was that we had an idea, a vision for the game, but slap something together fast and play it and see if it feels right. And if it feels right, or I think we're on the right path, well, then we'll work on it tomorrow too. And then we'll keep building on it, play it every day, change things, add things, take things out, rely on our instincts as gamers to tell us when it's working properly. And we call it, like I said, I think earlier, design by deploying. And I think that's always worked. And I remember when we were working on Age of Empires 1, we would take maybe half hour, an hour every day and play Warcraft as we started, or Command and Conquer, one of those two, just to keep the juices flowing and keep reminding us what we're shooting for. Then the day came, when we could actually play an Age of Empires game multiplayer. We had a LAN, local area network in our office. There was 8 of us playing, and we could actually sit down and play each other, 2 4-man teams of our own game. And it was so excited, because now we don't play Warcraft anymore. We play Age of Empires now every day. And that's how, it was a big, big day. And as the years went by and the games came along, there was always that day when, okay, now we're playing Age of Empires 2 online together for the first time. Now we're playing Age of Empires 3 together for the first time. And those were always big days, because by then I was convinced that our process would deliver an excellent game the way we built them, because the way we worked. And I think now, looking back, I think Brian Reynolds came out of MicroProse, and he designs games the same way. And I think that from what I understand, that Blizzard independently came up with the same process, and that's how they've made their games over the years. The prototype early, iterate daily. That was a big thing.
No, I agree. I mean, did you actually move to Germany then to work on this game, or?
I never moved there. I mean, one of my friends there I met at conferences in Europe. He asked me to come work for him when I was working for MicroProse. For Ensemble and Microsoft. I said, well, I can't do that. I mean, I'm a Microsoft employee. I can't work for someone else. But when we knew we were losing our jobs, I got in touch with him and said, well, I'm going to be free in a few months. And if you're still interested, I consider doing something for you, but I don't want to move to Germany. He said, that's fine. So I ended up working. I go over there for about 10 days a month for almost 2 years. I was working on a game called Settlers 7 with their team, and a few other things. And it was a great experience. I didn't like the flights. I didn't like being in the planes for 8 hours at a time. I didn't like being away from home for 10 days or so. But I really enjoyed the experience. Other than that, I got to meet a lot of neat people and got to see part of Europe and just be part of another culture for a while. I really enjoyed it.
Well, yeah, Settlers, another classic strategy game, a little bit like Age of Empires, isn't it? But that sounds interesting. Oh, good stuff.
Yeah, they have a huge audience. They have a huge audience of their own.
Yeah, it's huge in Europe, isn't it? It's huge around, obviously, UK where I live, and I know it's big in Germany, obviously. No, good stuff. Now, Bruce, you've been involved in so many huge games. Is there any? It's amazing. Fair play to you. What would you say though? Was there when you look back at your career now? Is there a sort of game you think you're most proud of? And it doesn't have to be maybe the most famous game. Is there a game you think, I had the most fun doing this, and looking back, I'm so proud of this?
Well, I have a lot to be proud of. I mentioned earlier we're playing for a World Series team. I think I played for several World Series teams. No matter how big a role I had, I was on the team. I got the World Series ring. Yeah. So it's hard to pick, but I think if I look back on what was the most fun, I would say Railroad Tycoon might have been the most fun to work on, because I was a railroad As a kid, I liked riding trains with my family on vacation, and I built model railroads as a child, and it was great to make it all come alive in that game. It was just Sid, myself, and Max Remington was our artist, and for most of the project, it was just the three of us building that game. I remember I had to do a spreadsheet for the company on what was involved in making it. It came out to like $167,000 it cost to make, and like so many man hours. It was incredibly cheap for the bang that we got.
Yeah.
And I just know we did field trips. I mean, Sid says, we're going to go do a field trip. So we went to a railroad museum in Pennsylvania, rode a steam railroad, went to look at a model railroad display, and we went to a little restaurant that was old railroad cars. I mean, this whole day was themed around railroading. And, that was like, I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this. We get in a car, we just drive off a couple hours up into Pennsylvania, spend the day immersing ourselves in railroad stuff, come back, and we're all fired up to get back to work. We did one more of those trips. We went over to Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., took a train to Washington, D.C., and we went to their Smithsonian, looked at their railroad stuff, and I did a couple other things for railroad related. So, I mean, and then I got to work on this really fun game. So that, I think, as far as my favorite experience was probably building Railroad Tycoon.
Of course, and that is a great game, and obviously it led to Transport Tycoon as well, and so many other games it's led to. It laid excuse the pun, the rails, didn't it, to future games, and that's very similar games.
I think I mentioned earlier. I think Sid's responsible for half a dozen or so game genres, and he did the first real flight simulator, for example, and I think Railroad, Tycoon, he did the first Tycoon, quote unquote Tycoon game, and submarine simulator, things like that.
I mean, not many people can say that. Let's be honest, that's incredible when you think about it. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, he deserves to be remembered for certainly as a Hall of Famer.
Yeah. You're still working in the industry. You're working at Bonus XP. You're working again with Dave Pottinger. I don't know if we mentioned him earlier, but he's another sort of, he's definitely a legend in my eyes. He also worked with you in Age of Empires. So how did this opportunity come about, and what's it like working with Dave again, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, Dave is a good friend. We've worked together now for over 20 years in 3 different companies. I think he's a brilliant guy. He's underestimated. He's a great designer, and he's a super programmer. Now he's the CEO of our company. He works like he wears like 4 or 5 hats, and he does all of them really well. But so the opportunity came along when we were all working for Zynga a few years ago. We built a game for them called Castleville, which was very successful. They were making $1 million a day at one point. Wow. So we did our job there. And as that unwound, Facebook became less of an opportunity for gaming, and we all got laid off. David left earlier because he wanted to do his own thing. He started Bonus XP on his own, and so I took the summer off after I left. I didn't do any work for a summer, and then I started I actually worked a little bit part time for a company in Germany called Anno Games. One of the fellows that I met earlier at Blue Byte was now with Anno, and he called. I got called the day I lost my job at Zynga. I had a text message and a phone call asking if that happened to me and if I was available to go work somewhere else. And I decided to take the time off. My wife and I had some vacation planned, and we decided, well, there's no rush. And so I started working for Anno in the fall, and I told Dave that they were only taking part of my time, and he was, the startup. And I said, look, I'd be happy to do some work for you for free. I got in the game industry for playing games, board games, for nothing as a tester years and years ago. That's how my first real interaction with professional gaming was to just be a play tester, remote play tester for board games for nothing. It seemed symmetrical that I would finish my game industry by helping out Dave with his startup for nothing as a friend and family kind of person. And he insisted on paying me something, and I did a little work for them, not a lot. And then he had me come down to Texas, and he asked me to work for him full time. And I said, I don't think I want to do that. I'm in my late 60s. I don't think I want to work full time ever again, but I'd be happy to be involved more. And so I became a part-time employee, and that's how I am today. And there's the 3 founders of Bonus XP are Dave and John Evanson and Jason Sollenbach. Those were all 3 critical guys at Ensemble. And I did really well with the Ensemble company, and I just felt an obligation to give them a chance. If I could do something I could do to help them, I just felt it was just something I wanted to do, and I'm still involved, hoping to help them.
Good stuff. I mean, one of the first games to release was Stranger Things, which is a great series. I'm a big fan of the show, and actually the game I've played it a lot, and I'm a big fan of the game. I love the sort of retro, sort of SNES look of it, this sort of top-down view. I think it's brilliant. What was your role in this particular title? And it was hugely successful as well, I believe.
Yes, it was. It's been an incredible thing. I think the last I heard, it was over 8 million downloads.
Incredible.
And the ratings were like 4.8 out of 5, or maybe not quite that high anymore. But that's pretty remarkable for a game with 8 million downloads. And that was a brilliant game. That was like Dave's ideas to my remembrance. He remember reading somewhere that the Duffer Brothers talked about we should make a game about the show. Mm. And so Dave we tried to find somebody who'd get us an introduction, and we said, look, we'd be happy to pitch you a game. And we started the pitch process. We put together some slides of what we could do, and then we built them a prototype, and they got enthusiastic, and we kept delivering milestone after milestone, and they kept getting happier and happier, and we delivered it on time and on budget, and obviously it really was successful as their marketing, and so we had it was a perfect storm, another perfect storm, a little game that turned into something really fun. And it was a blast. I mean, I helped with some of the ideas, some of the puzzles and stuff, and there was really a small team that made that game because the budget wasn't very big. But we're doing other things too. But I remember being involved. I certainly played it the heck out of it, and commented because we did that same process. And we put things together, played it. What do you think? We'll change this, maybe change that. Our design, our normal design process. Prototype it fast and then play it.
I think you've got the Midas touch, Bruce. I have to say, every sort of game you get involved in, or most of the games you get involved in, that tend to be huge successes. So, well, good on you. I mean, I'm really happy for your successes. It's been quite an amazing ride up there.
It's like I tell people. I mean, I've worked with some really great, brilliant people. Like Dave Bodger is a very smart guy, and John, and Jason is a brilliant artist. I'm just along for the ride, practically in this case. I'm just helping them. I'm a play tester. I once in a while I have an idea that helps, but they are the guys who are driving the bus. I mean, I'm just very happy to be involved with them.
Well, you sound very humble, but I've got a lot of respect. A really interesting question. Was there any games you ever worked on that never got released? And if so, is there any games that you think actually it's a shame this never was released because it could have been huge? Any games that you can remember?
Oh, well, I know Ensemble had a number of games we worked on that were canceled for one reason or another. I think some people and World of Warcraft was a big hit. It's still a hit. Maybe the greatest game of all time. And we were working on an MMORPG based in the Halo universe. And the management at Microsoft was enthusiastic. Then the guys changed. The people in charge changed and didn't like it at all and canceled it. So I think that was a game that could have been really great. Yeah. And Ian Fisher was the lead designer on Age 2 and Age of Mythology, and he was the lead designer on this game, and I think it would have been great. But maybe there wasn't room for too many more MMORPGs. I don't think that the emphasis went to Xbox at Microsoft, and you can't fault them. I think they did a good job of making the Xbox a pretty good success. And they focused all their energies on that, and an MMORPG would have been a distraction, and maybe it was maybe the right decision. But I think we could have made a great game out of that.
Well, it does sound a shame. It does sound like a very interesting title. I guess we'll never know, will we, Bruce? But there you go.
No, we'll never know.
Couple of final sort of questions, then I'll say goodbye. I know you're a busy man. I'm going to ask. I don't know if you can answer this question, but is there any projects, any games you're working on you can shed some light on? Is it all a bit top secret at the moment?
Well, it's not. It's a secret. It's not top secret. But yeah, I really can't discuss anything we're working on now. We don't have anything close to being published, and I don't want to upset anybody by talking about it.
No, I completely understand. Second to last question. Is there any bit of advice you could give anyone if they're looking to get into the sort of design elements of the video game industry? What would you say is the most important characteristics and skills needed?
Well, I think as a designer, I'll tell you what's worked for me, and that is at an early age, I played a lot of games.
Yeah.
And I was always disassembling a game, taking it apart, thinking about what I would do differently, and try to think about, as a designer, I think it's important to say, why am I enjoying this game? Why is this fun and why is that game not fun? What is the difference there? I think when you can understand the difference between when I'm engaged and enjoying myself and when I'm not engaged, when a game is not doing it for me, if you can understand what is happening between those two situations, that's an important step, because you're going to be required to create that engagement for the people who are going to buy your game. And I think you have to understand that. Second thing I would say is that I'm playing lots of games. You need to have that resource base for ideas. I think that I believe in lifetime learning. I read mostly nonfiction. I want to know about economics, history, science, and it helped me a ton in game making, because we need ideas. We need an idea for this. How we handle this. And the people with the widest breadth of knowledge sometimes are the people who have more access to knowledge. So I would say play a lot of games, understand what's making them work, read a lot, expose yourself to a lot of different ideas, not just nonfiction like myself, but also fiction, because you need stories in many cases, characters, villains. What makes a story work? And then the third thing I would say was I think I do a really good job, without thinking about it at the time, was building goodwill with the people I work with. So I get along with everybody, and when you always have something positive to say when you're shown something, like an artist shows you something, I would say, even though I was going to critique it, I don't like something about it, I would try to start off with what was good about it, and build a team rapport, build goodwill. I think it's always helped me when I've lost my job 10 dozen times for one reason or another, and my phone always rang. There was always another opportunity coming along, because I'd made friends and demonstrated an ability to work with other people. Try to make the people around you a better employee just because they work with you. I try to do that. Those are some of the things I would recommend.
Oh, Bruce, I really appreciate that. Just listen. Speaking to other people in the past, it's quite a cutthroat industry, isn't it, the video game industry? And you've got to have thick skin. I'm sure you would agree with that. And I like your attitude, Bruce. I have to say, you don't. It doesn't sound like you sulk about it. You've got on with it, and you've still got these great opportunities. So I really do respect you a lot, actually, for that.
Yeah, I would say I asked Sid one time about why I was the guy he worked with. And one of his answers was, he said, you always saw the glass half full. You think about it, we're working with incomplete software all the time. And we had a problem with, not a problem, but in Ensemble we had to put out fires, people complaining, this isn't working right, this sucks, or something like that. It was some part of the game. And it was like, don't dump water on our fire. We're building this, we're doing something really great here. Think about the positive things. We're not working on that part yet. It's not supposed to work. Don't worry about that. Worry about the thing we're working on. Is this working wrong? You like this, So the fact, I think I was a positive thinker, maybe, I guess, in retrospect, and seeing the glass half full, you thought that was useful to him.
Good on you. Bit of a crazy question to finish up with, but we ask all our guests, Bruce, if you don't mind. If you could share a few drinks with any video game character, who would you choose and why?
I was asked this question before. It's funny. I don't play a lot of games that have characters in them. I play these strategy games, which are usually global. But, I think that we did work on Stranger Things, the game, and I think I'd like to have a beer with Hopper. Yeah. So, the police chief from Hawkins, Indiana. I think he'd be an interesting guy to have a drink with. I can't deny that. It'd be really interesting. We need to talk to him about what he's seen. Now, look, Bruce, so it's been a real pleasure talking to you. It's, it really is. And I want to say thank you for your time today. And I know for certain our listeners are going to love this interview. So thank you so much. You're welcome, Adrian. A pleasure. Enjoy talking with you.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. We really hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get in touch regarding this week's episode or anything else, you can tweet us at Arcade Attack UK, at Keith Barlow 82, and at Arcade_Adriano. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/Arcade Attack UK. Please check out our website at arcadeattack.co.uk for lots of retro gaming goodness, interviews, reviews, features, top 10s, etc. And you can also find all our previous podcasts there. Our podcasts are available to stream from the website and are available to download for free from Stitcher, Podbean and iTunes, where you can also leave us a